Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BuzzStream Podcast. I'm your host, Vince Nero, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Alex Johnson, the founder, CEO, one of my old bosses of the Grit Group. Welcome, Alex. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, man, pumped to be here. So I found it pretty funny that we got our matching swag on today. So
Yeah. For those of you listening, Grit makes one of the most comfy swag shirts I've ever had. So this is in my rotation, my daily rotation. So I'm repping the Grit Group shirt today in honor of I used to work at Grit. So gotta rep it.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. And yeah, I think I learned that about swag early on is that like you can create a really cool t-shirt or have a really cool idea or design, but like if it's not on a quality product, then nobody's ever going to wear it. And so even if people hate what it has to say, if it's comfortable, you got a chance of it staying in the rotations. Got that going for us, I guess.
Yeah, I love it. And hey, man, that's all kind of part of the brand, right? Building the brand. And I think that ties into a lot of what I wanted to talk to you about today. Before I get started, I just want to remind everybody to like and subscribe, leave a 5-star review, add some, comments, engage with this stuff because the more you do, the more I can bring on awesome guests like Alex here. So, Alex posted something on his LinkedIn recently. It was about how important branding is in SEO. And you had actually published an article like this last year around the same time, and it didn't really get much buzz. But this one really stood out to me because it came right after the helpful content update, the Google leak, AI overviews, this, crazy time that we're going through in SEO. You must feel pretty validated now that, you get, you get to see some of this stuff kind of come true. But let's start here and walk me through the last couple months and kind of how your views have changed or maintained over the past year, given the helpful content update, the Google leak, and how they've shaped kind of your thoughts on SEO, digital PR, branding, and kind of this whole like coalescence of branding and SEO.
Yeah. I guess maybe a little bit of validation, but it's yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. It's fun to talk about it. I think I came up in SEO in my career. I worked at Red Ventures in the early days of RV, and got really entrenched into the digital marketing and SEO world, and kind of learned all the tips and tricks and such early on. But before that, I mean, to be honest, my love for marketing is much more on the like brand and advertising side. I love watching commercials. My team knows that, I'll always have a Super Bowl Slack channel, after that to circulate commercials. And so brand's always just been something that I love. And I love thinking about, why people do the things that they do and, why consumers operate a certain way and how brands interact with them. And I love movies and story and, just kind of all of that. And so selfishly, I just wrote that because I like talking about like brand. And I kind of didn't care if anyone I didn't care if anyone thought about it the same way, or I kind of knew most SEOs kind of stay away from that word. And frankly, it's not just SEOs, it's kind of anyone. You start to bring up brand identity or brand building or brand awareness and what is a brand and kind of no matter who you are, an SEO, a Google ad specialist, or frankly, if you're even working at a creative ad agency, like it just kind of comes with a stigma and it's kind of an aspect of it that not everybody knows what to think about brands in the first place.
Why do you think that is, Alex?
Well, I don't profess to know the answer to that question, but thinking about like some of the questions that we were thinking about talking through in this today, I'm like, you know, I got myself onto a path of, I would say maybe a way to answer that is that whether we like it or not, as humans, we generally take the path of least resistance, and I think that brand is a path of a lot of resistance. Whenever you get into trying to define something so fully, you get a lot of opinions and thoughts and perspectives, and a lot of times it's kind of hard to get something quantitative about that and to really say, yeah, that's it. And so I think that sometimes people just avoid talking about brand because it's so squishy and difficult to define that I think it becomes like a path of a lot of resistance, and people would rather kind of say, "Hey, I don't really want to get into that. Someone else figure it out," and then just kind of tell me what to do, or how to go be effective within it. And so I'm sure there's a lot of more thoughtful folks out there that have kind of dug into that question more and more. But for me, I think just like path of least resistance is something that's been top of mind. And I think that's incredibly relevant to what's going on today in the landscape of Google and generative AI, and you know, uh, and all the news that's come out this year. One of the big themes for me is just that, like, especially for SEOs, like the path of least resistance isn't going to work anymore. And yeah, there might be a few cases here and there where niche SEO sites are being built and still being successful. But I would venture to say that we're well on the path to, if you're not building a true brand that has a legitimate reason to exist, then just because you found some good affiliate deals in some high EPC categories with low competition that you can build an affiliate site in, it's just not gonna cut it anymore. And the same was true, 10 years ago at Red Ventures. We had sites that were kind of tier one assets that we knew were going to live for hundreds of years, or hopefully in perpetuity. And we had sites that you kind of knew were going to maybe have a shorter life expectancy. And I think Google's just raising the bar in terms of where the cutoff is on, like, yeah, this is an asset that's only going to live for a little while, unless it just takes a different approach. And I think part of that approach definitely starts to hint on brand building, like we're talking about.
Yeah, and we also have a lot of UK listeners and listeners from around the world, and I'm wondering, everybody might not know Red Ventures, so it might be good to give a little background, because I think that helps kind of shape some of what I know, about the internet. I mean, so yeah, if you want to just give a quick little rundown of what they are, and kind of maybe what you learned from them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's hard to deny that, like, Red Ventures has influenced a lot of the culture and a lot of the kind of, especially the strategic thought and perspective on how to approach digital marketing that I deploy and that my team deploys through the Grit Group today. But Red Ventures 10 to 15 years ago was, you could really think of them as a customer acquisition augmentative source for DirecTV, AT&T, Verizon, huge telcos. They were in all kinds of industries, and they would sign these deals that basically said, "Hey, we'll build our own SEO sites, we'll run our own PPC properties, and you pay us a bounty for customers that we send you. We'll take on all the costs of building and marketing those sites to generate leads." And Red Ventures was incredible at SEO and PPC to drive low cost calls and lead forms into the call center. And then RV had a call center itself that was pretty efficient and effective, and did really, really well. For the last 8 years to 10 years, Red Ventures has morphed into one of the biggest media companies in the world. So now, if you look at any top 10 list of you know companies that have aggregated the widest and deepest audience online, Red Ventures is up there with Ziff Davis, Meredith, Condé Nast. They just so you can look at Healthline.com, Points Guy, all kinds of huge properties that they now own and operate. So they've kind of shifted to this kind of media game. But really, what made Red Ventures different was just the tenacity and the data perspective that they and the speed that they operated at. And that was a really fun thing for me to learn early in my career. It's just to go fast, to test fast, to learn fast, to break things, to build them back, to try new things. And that's something I'm always thankful for. Early on in my career, it was just like having a lot of autonomy, having a lot of sites to work on,
Mhm.
try different things. But yeah, that's a little bit about Red Ventures. If you haven't heard about it before, it's still a very, very cool place. They've been in the news recently for some miscellaneous things, really, I think might be interesting to touch on later, around a couple of their properties. But for the whole, it's a really great place that has trained up a lot of some of the best SEOs in the world, to be honest.
Yeah, and I remember we worked. with Red Ventures, not with you directly, Alex. When I was at Siege Media, we did like link building assets, digital PR assets with some of those brands. That's how I first heard about them. And then, fast forward to 6 years later, when I was going to visit the Grit Group, where you guys are located in North Carolina, I remember seeing the Red Ventures kind of campus, from the plane and being like, whoa, this thing's way bigger than I thought it
Yeah,
was.
it is. Yeah, I think the article that came out a couple of years ago was like the sleeping giant that you never knew of, and it was a cool
Yeah.
New York Times article about it.
Well, so yeah, that's a little background on Red Ventures, and I think to me helps kind of connect those dots between the kind of this approach of turnkey SEO, kind of where it was like you said, you purchase a site that had some lights to it, some idea, and you could kind of get affiliate money kind of going. Even remember like Siege had a couple of these types of sites, and first it was like Amazon started cutting their affiliate percentage that they were paying out. And now, fast forward a few years and it's just Google is not giving priority to these types of sites. It seems like they really are focusing on the bigger ones.
Mhm.
So again, that kind of ties into this idea of building a brand. I so yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more and where people can start when we're talking about branding. That, like you said, it's a lot, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot to it. There's a lot of different parts. How did you learn about it? Give me tips, blog posts, podcasts, books.
Yeah, I was like, gosh, I've actually written about a few things, and evidently I'm got some passion about that one. I've got an article on like my 5 favorite marketing books, which has a lot to do with brands, and such. But I think like I don't know, maybe a place to go with some of that is like start getting into a few things that I feel like this year has really pulled forward in conversations. As you said, it's been whether it was AI overviews or the leak document or the core update, like what's going on today? Because I think everybody's been rightfully so, I mean, freaking out. Might be a little bit fanatic, but at least there's a lot of conversation about it. And one of the things that I wrote down and kind of preparing to chat with you today was just that I'm calling it like gaming the system versus building true value or real value. And when I think about the SEO niche, like as I mentioned earlier, I've always kind of been more of an advertising and like pure marketer by heart, but I just happened to learn SEO as the first like tangible work skill in my kind of early career. And so I think when I think about it on a very like pessimistic and maybe sounding negative side, I've always kind of viewed the SEO niche and the industry as a whole as a little bit of gaming the system. How can you
Yeah.
beat the algorithm? How can you be smarter than the algorithm? How can you do all of those things? And I think when you think about like consumer behavior and like what makes a brand isn't what you say it is. A brand is what other people tell you it is. In
Mhm.
and so before the internet existed, before Google existed, brands existed, and people have relationships with brands. And I think that in a world of SEO, so often you're thinking about how do I game the algorithm? Uh, that I think it's the thought of like building brand. I think what's hitting people in the face right now is that nobody likes the fact that Google's saying your site's not authoritative anymore. And I think that we turned it into such a game that we thought we had full control. That we thought, hey, we can game the system. We're smarter than the algorithm, but brands have never been smarter than the consumers that they're serving. Like they might think that they are at times. And maybe you predict what your consumers are going to like in the future. I think that's what Steve Jobs and Apple, that's like what something that made them so special is they didn't ask people what products they wanted. They predicted the products that people didn't even know they were going to want in the future. And it was such a cool way to think about product development, innovation, and those things. But I think that I don't know, something I'm finding interesting is just the entitlement that SEOs have of like, hey, I did everything right. I wrote the content according to EEAT. I have squeaky clean link building, link profile, all these things. And it's like, wait, Google, who are you to turn off my site and turn off the traffic?
Right, right.
Uh,
Like they owe us, right? Yeah.
yeah. And so I think there's just like a really healthy part of that to say that like consumer behavior can change dramatically overnight. And brands are always dealing with that, have always dealt with that. And so I think the SEO community and the SEO world is now having to deal with a form of that. Now, you could argue that Google has too much power and that they can manipulate that too much, but I don't know. I think the right approach for SEOs to have is to kind of embrace the fact that things can change, and that's just kind of part of the ecosystem we've all lived in. And so, I I've been personally jiving with this kind of idea of like gaming the system needs to go away, and just embracing building real value and like listening to the feedback that you're getting being just the mindset of the future for it. And that all ties into just you can't get rich quick as much
Yeah.
now as you used to be able to in SEO.
So you're saying those was the SEO heist that's not going to work? Did you see that? It was a few months ago. Oh well, I mean, I guess this was maybe like 6 or 8 months ago. It was like some guys built a whole site using AI content, and then he tanked after Google found it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, I'm always going to love the guys that are out there and gals that are out there building, the heist site that just, tests something crazy and new. Like it's hard for me not to resonate with that. I mean, like Ian House, who's been a part of our team, for the last stretch, and I worked with him back in the Red Ventures days. Like, we always tested stuff that was crazy and, maybe a little bit gray in terms of was it right or wrong. But I do love that about SEOs and about digital marketers as a whole. But I think that I don't know. I think that those are going to be less and less successful or critical to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like the short term. Like, what is your goal to make a handful of money in the short term, or grow something meaningful? Because I think if we have this conversation with a lot of people online that you see that are doing this kind of stuff, they might roll their eyes at this, right? It's like, well, I don't care. It's like, keep thinking that way and I'm going to keep getting rich. Like I've had people say that to me. I remember on Reddit, I commented on it was like the link building thread, and somebody was talking about buying links and using whatever link other person's link profiles. And it was like this super manipulative thing. And I was like, God, like I just commented, I was like, guys, I don't think this is going to work or have a long shelf life like this plan. Like, Google will sniff that out pretty quickly. And he was like, the person responded, yeah, you keep thinking that way. And then while the rest of us are getting rich. And it was just like, one of those, okay, like I probably shouldn't even chimed in here, but if you do want to build something meaningful, you got to really invest in it and invest time, invest thought, invest more strategy than just the one thing. So yeah, I totally agree.
It just hits on the human behavior part, like path of least resistance. And when you get deep into it, not to turn this into a psychology podcast, but I think like everybody's motivated by different things, and if making a quick dollar, like, and there's lots of ways to do that and be scrappy and generate income. I think I've always been someone that views work. And I think something that about being a business owner has helped kind of cultivate this perspective for me is just that I think that the purpose of work is a lot deeper than generating income and wealth and financial security. I think that like that's a necessary thing to survive and thrive in our community, but there's just a lot bigger meaning to it to me. And I think that when you not to like bifurcate, people in that way, but like I said, I just think that the path of least resistance that requires the least thought often is pursued. And so, yeah, it's like, hey, I can get rich quick. It's like, okay, well, is that good? Is that the way we want everybody to think? Like, did you win by getting rich quick, or did I learn more by going through the grind to build something for the longer term? Like, and again, maybe no right or wrong on that, but I guess I've just been kind of overwhelmed with that feeling of, yeah, the path of least resistance. Is that always the best path? And not to say that like getting rich quick is easy and that everybody can do it. I don't want to imply that. I think that we're just at this point in the SEO market, but just frankly, in kind of how content and commerce online is happening overall. I think part of this is like what's Google's doing, what is Google doing, and what's making it more difficult to surface results that serve your clients or your brands that you're representing or building. The other side of it is what is AI going to do to how people discover products and services going forward? And I think that disruption is going to be fascinating to watch. And so when I think about like AI overviews, to me, like there's been all kinds of conversation about, like, what is this going to do? Am I going to lose 40% of my organic traffic overnight? What's this going to do to my business if I'm heavily, SEO dependent? And we've seen that like if the rollout's kind of rolled out and rolled back and rolled out and rolled back, and but what that's really led me to is just saying, like, how are consumers going to shop for products differently going forward? And so I've been really enjoying listening to various podcasts that are going as far as saying that websites aren't going to exist in 10 years. People are like, what does that world look like? And so, we're busy talking about how the heck do we make sure we maintain our rankings on Google and, and ensure that we're, generating that traffic. I'm like, well, shoot, like, what if that's not even a source of traffic in audience going forward? And I mean, it sounds weird to say on a micro scale and then say Google antitrust, but for some reason, like, right, the world of AI, I don't know what that's going to look like. And so if websites don't exist, that feels bigger than, Google getting ruled against be the default browser, on phones. But, even that is like, we've historically always looked at Google from an SEO perspective as, it's the monster, the only thing that matters. Yeah, sure, maybe get 5% of your traffic from Bing or Yahoo, but there's just so much shakeup in terms of where our audience is even going to be available going forward. And I think it's really interesting to think about. And when I think about like even just thinking about like BuzzStream and like digital PR and kind of PR as a whole, and I'm really bullish on like PR in general being incredibly important going forward. I think that like I think PR, I'm not saying digital PR, I'm just saying PR in general. I think PR in general has kind of become a more top of funnel, less conversion oriented channel. And I would say if you grew up in the digital marketing, kind of funnel era, you probably don't think very highly of PR as a practice.
In the same way that PRs don't think very highly of SEO as a practice.
That's right. But man, I think PR, and I love where link building is evolved. And I think most chatter that I'm hearing and some of the perspective we have is that digital PR is link building at this point. And I think that digital PR, the best digital PR people I'm talking to right now seem to have this perspective of like, hey, my career progression is not to then become an SEO. My career progression is to then become a leader of communications and PR more broadly. And I think that's a cool perspective. And yeah, anyways, I'm rabbit holing us in all kinds of directions, but
No, I mean, you mentioned a couple things that I want to touch on. So one of them was the thing that I didn't mention at the beginning of this, kind of like the fourth factor, kind of that goes into all this Google upheaval is we're recording this August 14th, and was it Monday a few days ago? Maybe it was last week. Yeah, Google was deemed a monopoly by the Supreme Court. And so I have this conversation a lot when we talk about relevancy with different people. And I had James Brockbank on this podcast who talked about this idea, and he's not the first person to say it, and you hear it a lot. If Google wasn't around, would your content, would your links matter, right? And you can extrapolate that all the way out, right? Like if Google wasn't around, to your point, how would customers find you? Google wasn't around, how does your brand exist? And that just gets into that branding. And let's talk a little bit about branding and PR overlap, because I think there's probably a lot there that people don't really recognize. And to me, when I was first getting into this, I read a book by Ryan Holiday, who was the youngest CMO, and he just happened to be the CMO for American Apparel. But he also did stuff like branding and like, they called it like guerrilla marketing and like growth hacking. These are like all the buzz terms that got me really interested in it. And it was more than just, here is my lane and I'm going to kind of stick into it. Like I only do PR. It was like kind of thinking of the brand as a whole. It just so happened to be a tactic that maybe leaned heavily into PR. Like he was reaching out to journalists to promote some type of like negative ad that he had put out himself about something, just to like drum up some interest and drum up some conversation about the brand. Um, and, to push this brand in a certain way. He also did work with Tucker Max. I don't know if you remember Tucker Max.
Okay.
Is kind of a divisive guy, but like he had his brand, which was like just this kind of jerk guy. And so like the marketing kind of lended itself to that kind of like, I don't know, upside down branding and PR. So yeah, I think to your point, like there is a lot of that just kind of overlaps. And but I'm not exactly sure where that is. And I'm curious. Yeah. Let's get your take on kind of the overlap between those two.
Yeah. Yeah. Brands. So maybe an interesting perspective that I could have led off with this more so, but when I worked at Red Ventures and we were doing SEO for some of the biggest brands in the world, I mean, DirecTV, right? I mean, I think when I was there, DirecTV had like 2.3 million searches a month for their brand name. It was just some huge number. Um, and so what I realized when I left Red Ventures is that, I mean, we were, they were phenomenal at what they did, but it was really a harvesting game. They were simply harvesting the demand that the brands had created over time. Right. And when I realized is that like small brands that don't have 3 million monthly search views or searches for their brand, then like you're talking about non-brand as where you're trying to generate volume. Right. And it's I'm like, holy smokes, this is a whole different game. It's way more challenging. And so when you talk about like the value of brand, even from an pure SEO perspective, like the bigger the brand, the more there is to harvest. And it's just, anyway.
So you're saying, Alex, just to like put a real life example of that, because from my perspective, I want to make sure I'm understanding this. Like you worked with DirecTV and they had sites like DirecTV deals, DirecTV coupons, or whatever. So those sites were kind of leaning off of the brand value and how people might search for DirecTV and just search for DirecTV deals, or any kind of inserting themselves in that
Yeah, that's right.
conversation. Or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
You
Okay.
can just kind of think about like page one of the SERP is just valuable real estate. Or, that the bigger the brand, the more valuable that real estate is, and more people can benefit from it. And so, as opposed to letting their competitors creep up, and having Dish Net, satellite
Mhm.
Dish Network and whatever other satellite TVs were available, right? Like sneak in there, and the additional properties that RV ran kind of helped protect the branded SERPs. And there's so much volume for it that like even if the click-through rate falls off, below the one, like the 2, 3, 4, 5, all 3 million searches a month still has a decent amount of traffic come
Yes.
through at that point. But yeah, that's kind of what I was implying. But I think to your example of like the breadth of a CMO and like touching on a lot of different disciplines. One of the things that I wrote in that article around branding was kind of this. I made this up myself, so someone else has probably done this better than me before. But I've started to think about. My dad really challenged me on this because I always told him I was like, man, like we just bring really great strategy to the table is like one of our differentiators at Grit. Like we're really great at strategy. And he's like, what do you mean strategy? Right. And it made me think more deeply about that. And he gave me this book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which is an old school short read. I think it's Al Reese. Like I recommend to anybody who's in any sort of marketing field to read it. But what my takeaway where I ended up on that was that I'm calling it like 3 levels of strategy. So I got like channel level strategy. So that's just, what is my SEO strategy? Like what are the levers that I have within SEO to derive different strategies? I can say, hey, I have a content led strategy. I've got a digital PR led strategy. I've got a technical SEO led strategy. Like that's your channel level. Then I got like what I call operations level, which is, do you understand your funnel? Do you understand how valuable a customer is to you? Do you understand the parameters of which how much you're willing to spend to acquire a customer? That's where, to me, like operations level is, do you know your funnel? Do you know your economics? And can you apply it to the different channels? And then I call like leadership level strategy is, can you connect your actions to the mission and the vision of the company? And so to me, like the more like the generalist, the CMO and those folks are able to do that, right? The really good ones can connect all activities back to the mission and the vision of the company, which hopefully has, their consumers and all their stakeholders, in mind. And so when you think about brand, I think that's for an SEO person or for a digital PR person or for PR in general, the more you can understand like leadership level strategy and what that is, to me, that's what unlocks like real strategy in terms of like real SEO strategy. And so I wrote about that in a little in the article. Like, if you want to come up with a really great PR or digital PR campaign, if you don't truly understand the mission and the vision of the company, you don't truly understand your customers, you don't like, I mean, I know these can sound like basic things, but I think they're also just missed a lot. Is that how are you going to come up with a great piece of content? Yeah, sure, you might be able to like reverse engineer where did one of your competitors get a ton of links, or sure you can, figure out, what topic has a ton of search volume that you think you have enough domain authority to rank for. But I think ultimately being able to connect your actions back to the mission and the vision, the leadership level strategy of a company, that's to me what, if every junior, like, first, second year SEO spent time like understanding and learning that, not only does it like unlock better strategy, like a better content plan, a better digital PR plan, I think it also just unlocks your ability to go advocate for and get those things approved internally, because you can position it with an understanding of what's actually valuable to the company. And I can't tell you how many SEOs I've seen come out with an amazing plan, for X, Y, or Z, and then just really fail at selling the idea. And it's easy to kind of, especially in your first few years of your career, to just get dejected by, having different ideas of what to do and getting shot down. But I think like, yeah, anyways, I love those for folks at Grit. Like, one of the DNA that we're always looking to recruit for is just folks that want to get shot down, and but are willing to just really say, hey, like, I'm going to get back in the arena and figure out and really take that extreme ownership to say, if this idea deserved to live, if this idea deserved, if I really believed in it, it's my job to sell it. And it's my job to know like how and why to sell it. And ultimately, like, if it is a great idea, then get it across. But, a lot of times I think you might find out that you have an amazing idea, but it's narrow minded to your niche. And if it doesn't align to the direction of the company and the mission and the vision as a whole, like, that's probably why the idea is not getting any traction. So I don't know. There's a couple of thoughts, like unlocking true SEO strategy by understanding what your brand really stands for and why it exists. And then the ability to then sell your ideas and your strategies and your tactics by being able to communicate to your boss or your boss's boss, like in a way that, resonates and kind of connects up the chain.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in a lot of agencies, it's easy for, especially new people, a lot of them, at least when I was at Siege, like when we first started growing, it was like, where do we get new, eager, employees, right? And it's like usually fresh out of college, fresh out of university, you're getting people who have the skills and they're willing to kind of get into it. But I think what can sometimes happen is that sometimes you hit that first roadblock, right? And you come in with a lot of ideas and it doesn't necessarily fit the agency model, right? So then you have to kind of reconfigure your ideas to fit the model and so it gets diluted. And then the next thing you know, you're kind of just going along in the motions, right? You're learning and you're growing, but you're doing it in a different way than all of that motivation that you brought into it. So it can be hard to say think outside of the box or even in other cases, you are put on a client and you don't have either the time or you're not given all of the information needed to understand the brand, right?
Mhm.
So when you go to brainstorm, you're kind of thinking in a very narrow bucket. You've been given, this client, oh, it's a running shoe. So we could talk about running, we could talk about whatever. And you weren't told that they, also recycle all their shoes or, like some big key brand element that could be interesting in helping build a brand and get these ideas sold. So I guess how do you cultivate that type of agency workflow or whatever you want to call it so that to give your team members kind of that drive, but then also ensuring that they have that information to build the brand and that the goal is to build the brand as a whole and so that doesn't get lost.
Yeah. And that's a that's a question from someone who spent time in an agency.
Well, for what it's worth, I thought, I think you do and did when I was there a great job at that. I mean, you're a great leader and you really push the idea of leadership and being a leader. And, to give a shortcut to the answer or, what I'm getting at is I think a lot of it comes from the agency head and how I was always impressed by the fact that you enabled the people that work there to think for themselves and bring solutions and you touched on something about kind of feeling like if the problem fails, it's on you. But like if it does really well, it's also on you kind of thing where I think just, maybe a new person, a junior employee doesn't necessarily connect the dots there or like feel I don't want to call it pressure, feel the impact, I should say, to what they do. And I thought you did a good job of that. So like, I don't know, does that spark me?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to prompt me much to get talking about, what you prompted originally, just around connecting the work that you're doing to the purpose of it, and particularly in a client environment. And so I appreciate the kind words. I think, leadership has become like a passion of mine within business, but it's really developed from kind of just this accidental entrepreneur that I became and realizing, I think, just the gravity of what it is to lead people and how stinking hard it is. So, I write a lot on LinkedIn about miscellaneous leadership things, but, I think a lot of leaders get a really bad rap. And it's been, to me, I feel like a couple years, within the last couple of years, there's been multiple kind of tech layoffs or, this or that, where there's big cutbacks. And then you just see all this chatter on LinkedIn about how horrible these companies are, or how poorly they were led, and don't get me wrong, like leaders are making mistakes. And I'm sure there's places that maybe have bad culture, but I would just say that, like, more often than not, I think there's a lot of really great leaders out there. And I think what happens is just, unless you've sat in the seat, you've built and owned a business, you've led people at that level, like, man, it's stinking hard. And the reality is that business is imperfect, and leaders are imperfect, and it's kind of never going to change. Like that's how humans were designed. And I think that so I think leaders I think they need to be held very responsible to being excellent at their job. But I also think there needs to be, from a broader conversation perspective, I think it's just swung a little bit more towards, leaders are out for themselves and, not thinking about others, and disconnected from their employees. And there's a lot of good leaders out there. And I just think that narrative is maybe a little too aggressive. That tangent aside, your question around, like, from an agency perspective for clients, I think it is, I'll give you a great example that hopefully answers that question to some level, which is today, I spent a good portion of my day like rethinking our mission and vision. And what's happened for me is that for the last couple years, I've really loved it. But over the last couple of months, I've kind of decided that my passion and the way I would describe it is shifting. And so I'm at this point where I'm like, dang, like if I'm going to authentically lead, then I need to adjust what some of these statements say so that we can then build our operations and how we work in alignment with that. And the realization I have today, the meeting that I'm going to have after this is with one of my key people to say, hey, I've got a huge roadblock in my head because I'm not personally attached to our mission and vision in the same way that I was 2 months ago. And if I'm not, then everybody else on the team is going to feel that. And we're just going to wander around, do a bunch of work, and it's not going to matter that much. And so when you start to get into an agency world like that, oftentimes you're working with someone who's a VP of marketing, a head of SEO, a head of digital. And like, there's lots of people that are like phenomenal leaders that are in those positions, but they're also generally a couple layers removed from the leader who had the vision and the mission initially.
Mhm.
So if we're going to do our work as a service provider with a mission mindset of how does the work that we do connect to the mission of this client's brand, you've got to figure out how to dig that out of your point of contact or help them make sure that they're connected to it. And so
Yeah.
there's so much work that needs to be done. But I think like, yeah, gosh, I would encourage any other agency owner out there. And I'm always hopeful and pushing my team on this is like, we have to dig deeper to understand the why behind the work that we're doing. And the more closely you can understand that. And, so the main point of contact, whoever's working with that client, like you got to be a great detective and know the questions to ask to really pull that out. Because there's the practical, hey, this work that we're doing needs to generate a 20% increase in traffic. But then there's the soft part of, yeah, we're doing this because it, helps fund an eco-friendly, system that, all of these shoe sales go to fund, 1% for the planet or something. And there's another piece there. And so you get a lot stickier when you're aligned to the mission and the vision, man, it can become quick in an agency. And it's not just an agency, it's any setting is that, work just becomes work. It becomes a task list, becomes something you're just trying to accomplish. Even if you're trying to do it to the best of your ability, I think motivation and inspiration wanes, especially when you get disconnected from, why you're doing it. So, I think the onus on within an agency setting of if you're an account leader or account director or your main point of contact, like, and you're distributing work to the rest of your team, just finding a way to continually come back and say, all right, like we're doing this work because we're trying to serve this client by helping them generate an incremental 20% traffic. We know that that's going to yield $1 million for them. And that $1 million is going to create job security for my main point of contact. Maybe it creates upward mobility for them. Maybe they have 2 kids and they're growing family. They're trying to figure out, do I rent or do I buy a home next year? And so these are the ways that you can really deeply connect like the work that you're doing to say, hey, like we served this client, that we served the people that were there and we served the mission, of that organization in a really meaningful way. And so anyways, I could ramble about that for a while that's kind of become my like segue here of like, hey, I could keep talking, but I should probably and pause. But hopefully that kind of answers some of your question a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of pulling back all the way to the beginning of our conversation, and like, you know, this all kind of loops into this idea of I don't want to call it. I mean, the connection isn't as firm there to like. I'm not saying that's taking a shortcut, right? Like not knowing enough about the client is taking a shortcut, but it kind of is, right? Like when your work is not tied into the brand itself, it's going to hurt all the arms of the company, right? So yeah, I think one of the things that also stood out to me when I was with Grid, and I think this kind of ties into this as well, was you were really good at telling stories in reporting, right? And in with relationships with clients, and like how your relationship with a client has been going. And you could probably even take that a step further, saying like that is probably a good way to also constantly reinforce your agency's connection to the overall brand, right? Like the story is that we've been pushing, SEO improvements, and your team isn't implementing them, but like we really think that they're gonna impact, your brand awareness and da da da. So kind of having this ongoing big picture in your communications with the client seems to be the way to kind of get everybody on the same page, not just your own internal team.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, to the point of like nobody knows what brand means, like story is a huge part of that. And so you asked about books and stuff. I mean, one of my favorite books on that was like Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And basically, I mean, he's kind of built himself a marketing consultancy and kind of events based business purely based on taking the construct of how to write a story, like an actual script for a movie or a show, and turning that into kind of a how to do marketing recommendation. And I would definitely say that, yes, like just studying story in general is such a good thing to do. And it's one of those things I'm like, why every SEO should study branding is like you could replace that with why every SEO should study story. And I think the more that you understand how to tell the story and such,
And they're essentially one and the same, right?
yeah,
It's really no big difference. Like the branding is the way to tell the story, right?
yeah,
The different ways.
that's
Yeah.
that's right. But yeah, I think for agencies and um, yeah, finding a way to turn data and connect it to the story, find the story in the data, all those things are super helpful. And I think the more you know who you are as an agency, the more you can just more simply, reiterate your story, which is a lot of what I've just alluded to. I hate to say that I'm in a period of like change or indecision is kind of what it feels like. I think change is probably a more positive way to say it. But for the last few years, our mission has been to strengthen brands by driving profitable revenue growth. So like the word strengthen meant a lot to me in writing that. And so that's something we always tried to say, hey, when we're having conversations with our clients, how do we say that? Like, look, hey, Elizabeth, hey, Jeremy, like I'm like we're here to strengthen your brand. So let's make sure we're focusing on the projects that do that the most, and don't get too attached to one thing or another, but like come back to the mission that we have. And um, yeah, I've got a tangent on, well, my refined version that I'm working on is like, I think one of the biggest things agencies got to pay attention to is just frankly, ego problems. I think that like agencies tend to think that they know a whole heck of a lot more than the brands that they're interacting with. And I think it's just a very tempting, place to go in your mind. And I think I've always struggled with having case studies or marketing ourselves because of that dynamic. But candidly, one of the things I'm thinking about from a positioning for Grit is like, what if we positioned as the world's most selfless marketing agency?
Mhm.
Because I think marketing agencies just have a pretty bad rap of being pretty selfish. It's like, hey, we get to leverage brand A, brand B, and brand C to generate revenue. And frankly, like if we fail, like, yeah, maybe you have a performance based structure in place with that. But like most of the time, if what you're doing fails, like the client's the one that suffers, not you on that. So anyways, I think agencies have a bit of an ego problem.
Maybe another podcast.
Maybe another
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. And I think to bring back one of the things that popped into my head was kind of like a real life version of this, like when the story goes wrong, right? Like it's easy for us to talk about this kind of stuff. And again, like this is why I think when you talk kind of like philosophically about brand and marketing and digital marketing, some people kind of roll their eyes, like I said earlier, because it's hard to make those one-to-one connections. But Like I can think off the top of my head so many times when a brand has gotten negative press. Like I challenge, people who are listening, watching, like go to Ahrefs, pop that brand, like the website into Ahrefs and look at the site traffic, right? A lot of times you'll see rankings dip. Like I think Google pays attention as much as they don't say that they do. I think they do kind of pay attention to negative press, and in the same way, positive press. And you might go viral for something, and like that can really help. But on the flip side, like if it's a viral for something that's not really related to the brand itself, like it's not really going to do much for you. So that stuff does matter, and I've seen it. And again, like I urge people to kind of dig into that. If you are finding yourself kind of rolling your eyes when you're talking about branding and story and that sort of thing, like, man, I mean, you can make so many parallels to real hard evidence, and it's not just branded keywords, right? It's like the overall trajectory of a website and momentum and everything that can all be stifled and or hopefully aided by good PR and good story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, a thought that comes to mind with all of that is just like the goose and the golden egg. And I think that like that's maybe a really like it's just a simple and helpful fable to come back to in an instance like this. And um, I think in the SEO community in particular, I mean, the most cautionary tale. Now, I don't know. I hesitate to share about this because I respect Red Ventures so much. But I mean, the most cautionary tale that's relevant at the moment is, they just sold CNET to Ziff Davis, and like they bought CNET for 500 million, and they sold it for a little over 100 million. And there was a precipitous drop off in traffic over the last 2 years. And unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably seen some sort of chatter about CNET's use of AI content or this or that. And I think to your point, like the sentiment online has been that CNET kind of SEOified or, went heavy on the monetization. And to me, they chased the golden egg. They said, hey, here's this asset that we have that has a ton of audience, and we can sell a lot of things to that audience. And I think on the very negative side of how you could perceive all of that, like they lost track of the brand. And there's a lot of companies like Red Ventures out there that have very experienced SEO people who are starting to have more ownership of and autonomy in the direction of like big media properties that have built brands. And I think it's just an interesting time to look at that. And so I think to your point, like sentiment matters. And I think Google, and maybe we should pay attention to some of these other search engines as well. They're all kind of getting smart enough to pick up on some of that stuff. And so I was just with my teammate Paul up at like Affiliate Summit East and for another event up in New York a couple weeks ago. And I wasn't there, but Paul heard the CEO of Ziff Davis speak. And he said something that stuck with both of us, which was just that one of their measures of success for all their properties, like one of the biggest measures is how much direct entry traffic do they have? And his point was that if people are directly entering, then they've done something historically to satisfy that customer and for them to come back.
Yeah,
And
love that.
I just thought I'm like, yeah, that's obvious. But
Right.
I hadn't thought that in the last 10 years
Yeah.
of being in digital marketing. And I think if you want to prove that your brand has a reason to exist or that it's adding true value, I think that direct entry traffic, maybe that's the hot theme of
Yeah.
2025.
That's the thesis. Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's probably a good place to wrap up here because that kind of puts a bow on this conversation and the importance of thinking about branding and building a brand as an SEO. Alex, I want to thank you so much for your time. You can catch Alex, thegritgroup.io. Thegritgroup.io is the website for the agency. Alex is very active on LinkedIn, so check him out, connect with him. Alex, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a ton of fun. Thanks for having me. And hey, I'll give this, if you're thinking about being a guest with Vince, or if you're thinking about collaborating with him in any way, man, Vince, Although I'm sad that he doesn't work at the Grit Group anymore, man, I'm pumped that he was so excited to join BuzzStream. And it's been really fun to watch what you're building here. And so, any way I can be helpful, want to be. And Vince had one of the coolest things. He sent me, he knows that I love to play golf, and he sent me some Golf Takes Grit branded balls that I plan to use next week when I'm playing in a tournament. So, man, you care a lot about the people that you spend time with, and I know that everybody that hopefully that's listening to this, I know the content that you create, you take great care over, and you really try to provide value, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about. So I hope I'm excited, and thank you for having me. But man, keep doing what you're doing, because yeah, there's a lot of value to be created, and anyone that's doing it from the heart position that you are, I know it's going to be a great product. So I'm excited to hear what other guests come on and what else you do over at BuzzStream.
Yeah. Appreciate it, man. That means a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Alex.